expected of myself. Okay, by the time shul was over, somebody already was whispering, there's a war. I didn't know if it was true, didn't know if it wasn't true. I didn't really know what was happening until afterwards. We found out that the entire defense system in the south had fallen apart. There was a defense fence that was broken through in 22 different places. Paragliders went over this in order to make it possible for the vehicles holding large numbers of Palestinian soldiers from Gaza to go through. They knew exactly where to go. They had maps. And they went and did a series of atrocities that hasn't been equaled since the Holocaust. We're talking about in the next several days, that day, Shabbos, Sunday, Monday, and I think it's over at this point. The murder of men, women, children, one whole family, and abductions. And there was a festival going on, a youth festival of some sort, a rage, where 269 people were killed. But besides that, all of the killings on the kibbutzim, they were going from house to house. There was no defense. People were calling the army, but they knew where the high officers were. So they already had killed many of the high officers. So there was nobody who can give a command to anybody. How well did they know? They knew it so well that they knew where the officers were. They knew the twists and turns. They knew how to get through without presenting identification. This was very well planned. So this means that our intelligence failed completely. Okay, so the result, I saw some of the clips. I saw a young girl being grabbed by a man of the Hamas and thrown onto his motorcycle as he drove away. I saw a family in their house where the father was able to fight off the Hamas man for a moment, just for a moment. But in the meantime, he grabbed the wife and the two children. The two children were barely babies, somehow managed to crawl out of his grip, but he took the mother in front of the children and her husband away. And we all know what they'll be doing with her that night. So this is what's happening in Israel. Okay, in the course of time, so today is already Tuesday, the Israeli army was able to close the border area. So as far as they know, which is not all that far, but as far as they know, at this point, there are no new incursions. They planted a significant amount of mines over the border, preventing cars from going in without blowing up. But they've been pounding the Hamas, the army, of course, under the command of the prime minister and others, have been pounding the Hamas bases to prevent further war. The goal of the war, and this is no longer an incident, it's a war, is to make it impossible for Hamas to do this again and again. So today, they began a siege of Gaza, cutting off all supplies, including water, including food, in the hopes that this will bring them to their knees. And in the meantime, they're still bombing. The hostages have not been returned. We don't know where they are. The prime minister said he will not have the army bomb places where he knows the hostages are. Apparently he knows some of the places, but they're not going to stop bombing. In the meantime, in the northern border, the Hezbollah said that they would respond to our bombing by their own, which they have. So now the war has two different areas, the north and the south. We don't know that much about what's happening in the north. Nobody has given us a great deal of information about what's happening in the north, other than there have been sirens there. But this is what's happening. So when I say this is what's happening, this is what's been happening in Gashmias. Like all of the wars of Israel, there were already miracles happening. So I'm going to share the two that I know about. I don't know that much, and more will come out later. But the fact that we survived as a people means that in spite of all of the things that happened to us throughout our years of exile, all of the things that we were going to survive it. And that this is a test in our loyalty, our bitachon. Those of you who go to Hoshanas, which I'm sure are every last one of you, you might remember, and you could look in your siddur and see the translation. The one which in my nusach is the second day, I don't know what it is in your nusach, it begins with the word Om Ani Choma. I am a wall And then it goes through what we are to Hashem. We've been stricken, we've been humiliated, we've been destroyed, but we never lose our loyalty. We never lose our love. We never lose our dveikus. So this is what's happening here. So one Maisa happened in the south, in a small sleepy village called Ofakim, known mostly for this, that nothing much happens there. Okay, there are from people there. There is a yeshiva there. So a rabbi, his name was, okay, how do you like this from an unusual name? Rabbi Cohen. Okay, his people weren't sure if they should attend the synagogue or not. Is it safer at home? It's not safe at home. There were gun battles going on house to house in Ofakim in some of the parts of the town. Okay, should they go to shul? Who knows what will happen in the shul? He felt it was safer for them to be in the shul where they have the merit of tefillah b'tzibur. So many of them came. They're in shul. A terrorist comes in. He's armed. He begins to shoot. But he can't kill anyone because he ran out of ammunition. Now, how long does that take for him to notice? Seconds. So his car was in front. He ran to the car, which gave the people in the shul enough time to run out another door, to hide. He came back. This is all in like a very short amount of time. And the security guard killed him, killed the terrorist. So you've been to Israel, many of you. You see what our security guards look like. They don't look like army sharpshooters. That's also a miracle. Another miracle happened, also at Ofakim, that an old Sfardi Savta was able to talk to the guys, the terrorists who come. He's holding a grenade over her head and she's saying, your arm's bleeding, I'll wipe it. She made him coffee, she made him cookies. She kept him there until the army was able to blow him away. So there are miracles happening in the midst of all of this. The greatest miracle of all is, in spite of the thousands, I'm not using an exaggerated thing, we, the civilians, don't even know how many thousands we're talking about, but thousands and thousands of rockets have been sent, and there have been direct hits. But so far, the number of casualties is very small. There are casualties, but not a lot. The people who are in the hospitals, there are large numbers of people in the hospitals, are from the first 2 days of the attack, where there were thousands wounded. Almost all of them have been released, thank God. But when I say almost all of them, I'm talking about over 500 who are still in the hospital. That's a huge amount. Okay, and there are stories of heroism. There are soldiers who got their call-up papers when they're busy vacationing somewhere, who went to the trouble and the expense of coming back so they could serve. The entire army has been called up at this point, 300,000 to the south, a parallel number to the north. When you see these numbers, you'll see that this is a very high percentage of the Israeli population. When you consider that there are 9 million people in Israel, some of whom are Arab Israelis, so let's bring it down to 7 million, half of whom are women. Okay, we're talking about a very high percentage of the population who've been called up to the military. I know some of the people who've been called up, they're scraping the bottom, okay, but everyone who's been called up, of course, has the merit of the Kedoshei Lud, the two brothers who were, during the Roman oppression, put themselves on the line for the sake of the city of Lud. They claimed that they were guilty of killing a Roman centurion, which they didn't do, in order that the Romans not kill the entire city, which they would have done in revenge. And it says in the Gemara that they're in such a high place. They're in such a high place, like the Avos. Similarly, there was a young man from a traditional family, an only child, okay, and he was killed by Arabs and by their throwing a large building block at him. And his father was inconsolable. So he went to Reb Chaim Zatzal, and Reb Chaim said he's with Reb Shimon, and that consoled the father. But Reb Chaim wasn't making up stories. He wouldn't have said that if it wasn't true. So the people are walking towards what they should be, every person in their own way. Hashem knows every person, who they were born to, what their education is, what their natural tendencies are, what their capacities are. Not everybody should be doing the same thing. They ended the Zman early, so the people who should be learning and bringing down the Siyata Dishmaya that keeps us alive are learning. So that's what's happening in Israel. So if you have any more questions, the time is now. Okay, shall I read the questions that have come in already? Is that what you would like me to do? Okay, so I'm reading the questions that have come in, but I'm asking of Tzipora, who's our technical person, to read any further questions on this situation.
No, we
Okay,
just
so
have one question from our member, Robertson, which we mostly covered, but in case you didn't, I'll just read it over. Um, Dear Robertson, I have this question, and I understand that no one can know Hashem's hidden reasons for what he does, but it is our responsibility to try to understand the message. He
yes.
is giving us in everything that happens in the world, all the more so when it is aimed at us. What is Hashem trying to say to us, especially as it happened on Simchat Torah, on Shabbos, completely off guard? A high number of victims, most of them civilians, innocent people. What is it saying to us? What is Hashem trying to say to us? Thank you.
So I'm going to tell you two things that may seem contradictory, and indeed are contradictory. It says in Tehillim, I keep on telling people this message because your question is a good question. It says, Al yukochtsus keferet ein havin. Don't be like a horse or a mule that doesn't understand. If a horse or a mule was in Ofakim, it would keep on looking for grass or hay. Don't be like that. Don't resist the mouth bit. Don't resist the reins, which are a hint, the Meforshim and Tehillim say, the restrictions that the Torah places upon you to humanize you. Don't be like a horse. Don't be like a mule. But, and that's not the end of the sentence, it says, Rabba mochavim l'rasha, that evil people suffer. So when you think about the fate of evil people, the fate of these people, even in Olam Hazeh, is that they become less than animals, they become brutal, they lose everything about them that makes life worth living. But in Olam Haba, we have no words to describe what will happen to them. But what? Okay, Abotech ba'Hashem chesed yisovavenu. A person who trusts in Hashem is surrounded by chesed. So you could say, well, where's the chesed? Look at what happened. Murders, rapes, maimings. Where's the chesed? So the chesed, and I want to read you something from Chovat HaLevavot, something short. I'm not going to turn this into a shiur in Chovat HaLevavot, although I would like to. So what he says in the Shah HaBitachon, which I recommend to everybody to read, everyone should ideally know Shah HaBitachon inside out. He says, we have a need to trust. We're born helpless. We put our trust in our parents. We discover at a certain age that our parents can't do everything. We then transfer this trust to friends, then to authority figures, to people who we like. But humans are very limited. We can't always be there. We don't always even know what the other person wants. We aren't all powerful. We can't commit ourselves to being able to do anything. And the more you know this, the more you could love humans, because we could commit ourselves to wanting good. But that's all. So trust belongs to Hashem. As an adult, most people transfer their trust from the authority figures at some point to themselves, which is the worst thing you could do. The worst thing you could do is to put your trust in yourself. Okay? So trusting Hashem means what? What do you do? So he says that the first thing to is notice what happens when you trust. Trust is acting in a way that demonstrates that you know Hashem is in absolute control and is there for you. He has no agenda of his own. Anger and other negative emotions that we have are a consequence of our frustration of not being able to do things as the world running according to our wishes. Hashem has nobody and nothing that could stand in his way. Okay, so from that perspective, when Hashem puts all of these terrible dimensions of confusion and suffering, as he told us he would, it said in last week's parsha, Astira Astira Panai, I'm going to hide my face, my identity from you. We don't know him. So in nature, everything does do what it can do. Humans have to do what we can do as humans. One of the things that we can't do as humans is penetrate this concealment. So we're not expected to. But what we are expected to do is to say to ourselves, Hashem is confronting us with evil. As Maral says, any confrontation with evil demands from you to say, I'm not this. I'm not this. So that means I don't think I'm in control, the way the Hamas says. There are Rabbanim who said to therefore be more careful with the observance of Shabbos, through which we give over control to Hashem. Okay, Hashem hears us, He knows us, our tefillos are heard. It says in the creation narrative that Hashem breathed the breath of life into the spirit of life into Adam. The translation inclusive spirit of life is spirit of speech. So you create yourself as a human through your speech. This is why your tehillim are important and your prayers are important. You create yourself. You make your consciousness higher in terms of your awareness of Hashem. So if you realize Hashem is in control, then doing what He wants of you is a logical outcome. However, and I want to make this very clear, I once went to Rav Gamliel. I don't remember which war it was. We've had so many. And I asked about what people should be doing and what I should be doing. And he quoted from the Mishlei Kohelet, I think Kohelet, Yodea Adam Marat Nafsho. Every person knows the bitter place in their soul. Everyone knows who they are, but by virtue of their personality, their life situation, where they have influence, what their education takes them to. You have to figure out what you should do. So that's one side of it. The other side, which turns this into something paradoxical, but not contradictory, is the Gra says that one of the worst things that happen to us in exile is that we don't have prophets. So when people say, I know why this is happening, they don't. They may, because they're not horses and because they're not mules, they may say, well, here's the problem. This must be what Hashem is aiming towards us. Could be not. So you have to figure it out for yourself. But there's one thing that I think is very evident, which is that the results always tell you something of the cause. So one thing that happens in war is that there's great unification. So there certainly was great non-unity before. There certainly was. In fact, I think it was unparalleled, just like the horror of this war is unparalleled in Israel. So it seems to me that being forced into unification tells us something about where we should be moving. Okay, so you're asking what you should do, so I'm telling you, don't think that there's a prophet who could tell you, but I think you could tell yourself. Okay, certainly we have words of the prophets, not a prophet who's alive now, we don't have that. But if you learn, you'll learn Daniel, you learn Yeshaya, you learn Yirmiyahu, then you're not in the dark. Okay, so I'd recommend those of you who have a need to see, like the screen, what are the possibilities, that learning the prophets, especially, this is just an opinion, especially the parts of Daniel that deal with the visions he had about the evolution of various exiles will tell you something. Now, the fact is we're suffering under Yishmael. So in prophets, the Western nations, who are descendants of Esav, are compared to an ox. An ox is the strongest of the domesticated animals. Their power, their empire building, their creativity, and their arrogance, and their bloodthirstiness, and their continual hunt is who they are. While the last of the exiles, who's hinted at in Daniel as being like the clay feet of the idol that he saw, with the golden head but clay feet, okay, are like the donkey. The word donkey in Hebrew is chamor, which is related to the word chomer, material. They're base. They're very base. They're vulgar. They have great emunah, but no spiritual sensitivity or consciousness. Their heaven is a man having 70 virgins. So that's who we are. So at least we should be able to say to ourselves, lo zeh, we're not material. We want to be focused. We want to do Hashem's will. And what Hashem's will is for us is, of course, the Torah. But as you know, it says, derech eretz kadma la Torah. So people must translate derech eretz as having nice manners, like knowing the forks go on the left side, but the knives and spoons on the right side. That's good manners. But derech eretz, Marwell points out, means the way of the earth. The earth causes everything to grow and to flourish. So there are seeds in the earth, and they grow, but the earth has spiritual life force that gives it the ability to make things grow. Derech eretz is going through life in areas in which are divrei reshus, where you don't have specific mitzvot. Okay, not usher and mutter, but here it is in front of me. There's no, how often do I have to call my daughter-in-law? Is there a halacha? No. Do I have to forgive my great uncle for leaving me out of his will? There's no halacha. Okay, how many lullabies are enough lullabies? Okay, we live, women especially, live in the world of divrei reshus. Derech eretz means being a person who nurtures. This means spiritually, physically, emotionally, intellectually. And you have to look at your own life situation to see where that could be put. But you have to have that in you before the Torah, otherwise you'll twist the Torah into meeting your own agendas, which is, of course, would be tragic. Okay, do you have any questions again?
Yes, Rebbe.
Yes.
My not yet from friend said regarding the war, maybe Israelis will finally stop fighting with each other. Of course, we do not know why Hashem does these things, but it makes me wonder if Hashem was unhappy with this terrible conflict. Also, who are the Gadolei Israel who lead us now? Thank you.
So I'm in total agreement. The war has brought us together. Hashem certainly, both through the written Torah and oral Torah, told us many times he does not like hatred and disunity. There's no question about that. But to say that's the reason, I think we have to look at ourselves as individuals as well, but certainly that's an effect. In terms of who are the Gedolei Torah today, that's certainly not my place to say. You realize that. I'm just going to throw out some names that are there and why they're there. Okay, so if you could divide the world of observant people into segments, and you were to look at the modern Orthodox world, the Sephardi world, the Yeshivish world, and the Hasidic world, we're not alone. Okay, there are people who lead who are great people in all of these, so moving backwards. In the Hasidic world, you have the Belzer Rebbe. I'm not saying he's greater than any other Rebbe. That's not my place. I'm just pointing out he takes responsibility for a community in ways that I've never seen done or even read about. Everyone in that community has somebody who's there for them, for their employment, for their shidduchim, for their spiritual growth. He's very available. Okay, the Rebbitzin is very available. She's come to Neve Yerushalayim. She let the girls come. She has to her from Lav without being invited. She was taking swimming lessons for exercise purposes. The girls descended in the pool. She danced with them. She sang with them. Okay, this level of being there for Klal Yisrael is something to consider as being leadership. In the non-Hasidic world, you have people who have great dedication and erudition. Okay, you have the Rosh Yeshiva, who may not be easily accessible to people who are listening to this broadcast, but who are there and who instruct the students in what the Torah actually wants of them. So this would be the Rosh Yeshiva of all of Panovich, of Mir, of Chevron, of Brisk. They're certainly there. And their names are Rav Povarsky, Rav Kohen, of Panovich and Chevron, Rav Soloveitchik of Brisk, the Finkels of Mir. Okay, so there are names and there are people. And in addition to that, you have rabbis who lead through the community, Rav Asher Weiss, to Rav Reuben here in Har Nof, who during the time of the Pigua took real leadership in a spiritual and material sense, okay, and various others. In the Sephardi world, we have the great sons of Rav Ovadia, Rav Yitzchak Yosef, who's already written an enormous set of halachas from called Yalkut Yosef, his brother Rabbi David, who's a great spiritual force. We have Ruvain Elbaz, whose love of Am Yisrael is something that's worth studying as though it's a book. In the more modern communities, we have leadership. We have the Kiruv Rabbanim who reach out to anybody. We have Chabad, the famous Shluchim and the less famous Shluchim. Okay, we're not missing leadership. What we're missing is submission to leadership. Okay, more questions?
Yes, Robertson. How do you maintain calm for you, your family, extended families and friends and students? Are you telling them to hide? What do you think is the end game here? Smother Hamas? Do you think Israel and US are doing the right thing in not divulging too much about their strategy with respect to the hostages? What do you think?
So in terms of remaining calm, so I'm going to tell you a true story, and then I'm going to tell you a mashal. The true story is as follows. There was a famous Chabad chassid whose name was Mendel Futterfass. He was in Siberia for 7 years. I know this will sound crazy. He was even able to makarev people in Siberia, which is unheard of. When he finally was released, I actually met him. I was in the home of a friend of his from his youth in Russia. I was there for a Friday night when he came in. A personality. So he was in Eretz Yisrael, where he became a big mashpia in the Hasidic community. And Reb Melech, who I should have mentioned him when we're talking about people who are there for us to follow. Reb Melech, the wonderful Reb Melech, just watching him and listening, you don't even know he's available. You could see him on internet. So he wanted to meet him. So he did. And he said, how did you maintain yourself in Siberia? How did you end up leaving Siberia the way you are? So he said that once a family of people who worked in the circus were brought to Siberia. Who knows what they did? I'm making this part up. Maybe they did tax offenses. Who knows? They're there. It's very boring in Siberia. It gets dark very early. The nights are very long and cold. So someone commanded the tightrope walker to show what he could do. So they extended a rope from one cliff to another, 500-foot drop. Said, could you walk it? He said, yeah, I could walk it. So he walked over the tightrope. Okay. And so that was very amusing, very entertaining. Then the next time he's there, they said, well, could you walk it backwards? He said, I could. And he walked backwards. Could you walk holding things? I don't know if you've ever been to the circus or see it on through the media. The tight ropers I've seen is holding poles with dishes on them. He could do it. And they said, what else could you do? So you said if you extend instead of rope 2 iron cables from cliff to cliff, I could ride a vehicle over it. I could ride a wagon over it. So they did, and he did. Okay, now, here's the important part of the story. He said after they'd seen him go back and forth with his wagon over the 2 thin cables, he says, who wants to ride with me next time? If you were there, would you volunteer? Now they saw him. They saw his confidence, they saw his ability. The only one who was willing to go with him was his own daughter. So Reb Mendel said, this isn't a true story. Okay. This is how I could be in Siberia. I could be the daughter of the one who knows everything, who takes me where I have to go. Either you trust in Hashem or you don't trust in Hashem. Now, if you trust that Hashem knows what he's doing, what's best for you, you'll do his mitzvah and you'll share his mitzvahs because they're the source of all Yeshua. So that's his story. So in terms of how do you maintain calm, you could maintain time if you believe that that you're there and that you're being developed by Hashem through his hashgacha, testing your trust, testing your faith, testing your ability to be the person he wants you to be. You could stay calm that way. Okay, another story, a true story, not a mashal this time. The Chasam Sofer son was known as the Ketav Sofer. So he once had to go somewhere. He had left Pressburg, which is where they lived, and he stayed over in one of these little inns that dotted the highway in earlier times when travel was very difficult. He got to the inn, and the Jewish owner, these inns were usually owned by Jews, okay, was accused of stealing the king's purse, which of course he didn't do. And he was immediately sentenced to death within a short time. So you go, all right, it's Hashem who brought here, I have to do something. So you try to find out who are the influential people here, who could he talk to, get some money, offer a bribe. You don't say bribe, you say, and for your concern and your desire to see that justice is done, you deserve something. Okay, he tried the whole thing. Bottom line, nothing worked. So after several days of effort, he went back to Preshberg. He didn't know what to do further. His father, the Chasam Sofer, came to him in a dream. And he said to him, you think it was for nothing Hashem brought you to that inn, where a Jew is being accused of a crime that he didn't do? How could you let him die? How could you let them get him? So he said to him, Tata, I did what I can. I tried bribery. I tried talking. I don't know what else to do. Tell me what to do. And you know what the Chasam Sofer said to his son? He said, did you daven? Now, you know and I know that the Ketav Sofer davened 3 times a day every day, and his tefillah was not like your tefillah or mine, but much deeper, much more profoundly focused. But he said, I have to daven. And then he davened the way he would daven if it was his only child who was being sentenced to death. The next day, the police, on their own, arrested somebody who was a criminal, and they found that this criminal confessed to stealing the king's purse. So the reason I'm telling you this story, because not all stories have happy endings like this, the reason I'm telling you this story is that the more you focus on this, that Hashem is taking you wherever you have to be because he knows who you could be. He wants us to turn into people who are like Yonah. In the middle of a storm at sea, when the sailors ask Yonah, who are you? Now, if someone asks you who you are, people usually answer by either their names and addresses. My name is Shelley, I'm from Montana. Or their professions, I'm a dentist. Yonah didn't say that. He said, Ivri Anochi, I'm part of the people. Et Hashem ani yareh, I fear Hashem. So this sort of thing is meant to change your identity, to turn you into somebody who's a Yehudi who fears Hashem. Okay, so in Orchot Tzadikim, he gives examples. So you have, for instance, Ovadia. Ovadia was not Jewish by birth. He was an Edomite. He ended up in the high court of King Achav, who was a terrible person, and he converted. Now that means that somehow he learned the lesson, know what you aren't, and figure out what that is, and then you'll learn who you are. When he converted, whether it was before he began to be involved with Achav or not, I don't know, but he was living in that era. Achav declared that all of the prophets of God in his country must be killed. He did that because of his hatred towards Eliyahu HaNavi, who told him that there would be a famine brought about by a drought, brought about by his serving idols. So when the famine came, he saw it as the problem of the prophets, meaning if you have spiritual force and you're telling us that you have to go back to Hashem through suffering, you're the ones who own the problem, not we have to change. Okay, so Ovadia managed to hide 100 prophets in 2 different caves, and he had to sustain them with food from his own salary. Now, we assume he had a large salary. He was important. But even so, he ended up having to borrow money from the king's son-in-law. The king's son-in-law had a plan. He really knew where this money was going. He knew about the prophets. He didn't let Ovadia know that he knew. His plan was to extend so much credit to Ovadia that eventually he'll reach a point where he can't pay, and then to get back the money owed, he would take Ovadia's sons as slaves and turn them into idol worshippers. That was his plan. So mid-plan, Ovadia died. Such things happen. So this money is still owed. So the king's son-in-law sent people to Ovadia's wife, demanding her children. So she went to the cemetery, and she cried out, Ovadia, Ovadia. And the voice came from heaven saying, there were a lot of Ovadias. And she said, Ovadia Yareh Hashem. Ovadia who feared Hashem. Oh, that Ovadia. Not so many people are called God-fearing. God-fearing doesn't mean being afraid of punishment. That's fear of suffering. Fear of God is quaking before him, knowing the enormity of his control and power, which Ovadia knew. So then she was told to go to Eliyahu Navi, who through a series of miracles was able to get her money. You're familiar with the stories, the pouring oil and all of this. Okay, but that's not the point here. The point is that getting the title Yoreh Hashem wouldn't have happened to Ovadia had he not have to live through the difficulties that he lived through. Now this Ovadia was a prophet, and the book of Ovadia, which is only one perek, is about the fate of Edom, the terrible fate of Edom, okay, who don't do any of this. So whatever the war should take us to, we have to remain calm and ask ourselves one basic question. Who am I and how am I responding to things? Whatever happens on the outside is not in your control, ultimately is to your benefit, even though there's no way we could see it. So it's not like if you were really a Baal Bitachon, you would see it. No, it's not within human capacity. We can't say this one suffered and not that one. We can't go there. We can know who we have to be. That's all we can know. Now, in terms of the other side of your question about how the government is handling things and what's happening, what's not happening, I know only things that are given out in the news media. I don't have any real connections. The one time I tried to use my connections, I do have relatives who are politically connected, and they gave me answers on Monday that were no longer true on Tuesday. So but nobody knows what's going on, really. All we know is who we should be. What's going to be the end plan, the end game? I hope it'll be the total defeat of the Hamas. Why isn't the government doing anything for the hostages? Because any compromise with them is feeding sweets to the devil. Any other questions?
Rebbetzin, we've got a couple of questions come in. What can we do here in America? I feel so helpless. What are the ways we can help?
So certainly tefillah, certainly organizing Tehillim groups, certainly giving tzedakah. A lot of money is needed for the displaced families. Give it through well-known tzedakahs like Ezer Mitzion, Yad Sarah. Don't give it to charities that are like sprouting out like mushrooms after the rain. Give it to reliable, well-known charities. The people are in great need. Give money. Okay, that should be clear enough. Give money. Do tefillah. Make resolutions, even for a brief time, like from now till a week from now, till a month from now. I'll improve myself in some specific way. Nothing that you can't do and nothing that's for the rest of your life, but that's what you could do from there.
Thank you, Rebbetzin. Next question. I live in Israel, but my Hebrew is not good enough to understand the news. I don't seem to get enough information from English language sources. I feel lost. Also, though I've reached out to a couple of other single people or people in general, I don't think it is appreciated by them. The only people who have reached out to me are my American friends and relatives. This makes me feel despondent, as if I don't belong here in Israel. What would you suggest for me?
Shalom Aleichem, come to me for Shabbos. You live in Israel, I'll have you. My number is 0548 441143. That's number one. I can see my family looking like they can't believe this is really happening. Okay, but in terms of news sources, just not their view of life, but just knowing what happened. I'll tell you 3 news sources that I found to be relatively good that are English. Again, they're not people whose views on life in general are views that I share. Okay, Time of Israel, Jerusalem Post, although they slanted even more than Time of Israel, and believe it or not, English Al Jazeera. They tell everything with an Arabic slant, but you know what's happening in Gaza through looking at their news. So it's possible to know what's going on just with English sources. I haven't found the Hebrew sources to be more reliable except Channel 14, which I found to be good. But I wouldn't say that you're losing anything by not seeing Channel 14. Okay, any more questions? We have time for one or two more questions and that's it.
Yes, Robertson. My husband wants to know if this is a war of Gog and Magog, as written by Prophet Ezekiel.
I'll give you a great answer. It's going to be so short. I don't know. You need a Navi for that. Maybe. Could be. Then again, could be not. I don't know. You would need a Navi.
How do
Yeah.
we encourage a secular Jew who doesn't understand Emunah and Bitachon and yet has great love for being Jew and Israel right now?
Encourage them to feel part of Israel, to be part of and you could even use this word with secular Jews, you're part of the tribe, you're part of the family. We've been having this for years. Study the Inquisition and the pogroms. See that our eternity as a people is guided and feel part of it. Do it through giving. Extend to him the possibility of prayer. My husband's son went down to the front in the previous war in Gaza. We've had four so far, but who's counting? And he brought tzitzis with him. And he didn't think the Chayalim would necessarily want that. A lot of them aren't observant. They went like nothing. I mean, like they couldn't get enough of them. Okay, at one point, the commander of the base became involved as well. So you could also sponsor tzitzis, by the way, somebody who, because the Chayalim want them, somebody who asked what they could do. So the email for sponsoring tzitzis is ELOZ, okay, I have it wrong, GOT, at gmail.com.
Elozor G. Yeah,
No G.
Elozor, Elozor.
Just Elazar, okay.
No, Elozor G.
Elazar G, okay.
Yeah.
Elazar G at gmail.com. And I'll inform you how you could sponsor tzitzis. So your non-religious and not yet religious friends who want to feel bonded, let them do something that bonds them. It's good for them.
Thank you, Robertson. Next question. We have many groups in Klal Israel who all feel that their way and their leaders and what they tell them are the only right way to believe and behave. It seems that the only time of Tzahar do all of us work with each other because the situation is desperate, and when Hashem helps and brings us back together, we go back to being normal. People go back to the way it was before. How can we avoid this situation in the future?
So I'll give you the formula, but I can't tell you that it's easy to live by or that I live with it consistently either. Force yourself to seek truth. So you can say, this is what I think is true. Step back and say, and this is what I think is good in the other person. Not necessarily true. You don't have to assume that your assumptions are wrong and the other person's assumption are right to feel unity with them. I know what's good. I've learned. I have my Rav. I know what's good, at least for me. But I could see what's good in you as a person. I could see what's vulnerable in you as a person. I could be there for you as a person.
Rebbetzin Gottlieb, is it true that they succeed in terror because their women wear modest clothing in public?
Well, if you would have asked that question 20 years ago, I wouldn't know what to answer. I would say, I don't know why they're successful. I'm not a Navi. But I could tell you now that their women no longer wear modest clothes in public. You can't tell them apart from Jewish women a lot of the time. I've even seen tznius posters in the Muslim quarter, like you have tznius posters in Borough Park. They'll say, wear things this long, this. It's not what it once was. When I first came to Israel, you never saw young women walking around outside by themselves. They were always accompanied by mama or by some male relative, and they were covered from head to toe. No more. Loud makeup, high heels. The only thing that's retained in their public image is the hijab. Otherwise, you can't tell them from anybody else. Whatever merits they have, that's not it.
Next question.
Okay, next question will be the last one. Yeah? Yes?
Does Rebbitzin think it's a cop-out if I put myself on no reading the news zone because I can't emotionally deal with the ghastliness of the truth of what Hamas is doing or did right now, but I'm davening more nevertheless. Is that all right?
There's no mitzvah, like there are things that Hashem demands. For instance, it says, love your neighbors, you love yourself. That's a demand, and there are halachas about how it should be observed. It says to make Kiddush Friday night. There are things that the Torah forbids. Don't eat treif, don't steal. Then there's this big middle place where we have to figure out where it's taking you. There's no mitzvah to listen to the news. However, and this is why it's delicate, when a person says these words, Shalom Yeli, it'll be okay for me, that's not good. So if you could feel the pain of Am Yisrael without seeing all of the terrible things in the headline, there's no reason why you should look at the news. If you need to know this, because the same way if you had a relative in the hospital, you want to read up on the illness and read the charts and talk to the doctors, because that's your relationship to them, then you should see the news. It depends on who you are or where it takes you. Okay?
One last question, Rebbitzin.
Okay, fair enough. One last question, yes.
They're just members who want to confirm the email address. So if we could have the email address for the Tzitzit website, email address for the organization.
ELOZOR, it's Elazar, G, @gmail.com. Okay? So also I noticed as I was reading the questions that had come in, many of you wished me well for all of the shiurim that we've had. I want to also make clear one thing that it seemed to be unclear to some of you. I am not retiring. I am not retired. I'm not retiring. Just time-wise, it didn't work out that easily for the site. My schedule and theirs didn't jive as much as easily as we would have liked it. But I definitely am not retiring or retired. And if you go on my website, you might find other places in which we could meet. Okay, so I wish everyone well and Besuras Tovos. Okay, we should hear only good in the future. Shalom, shalom.
Thank you so much, Rebbitzin, and we look forward to having you for other classes throughout the year.
Yes, Bezrat Hashem. Okay.